I'd like to introduce our energy transition panel, Action or Inaction. The panel is going to be exploring the state of renewable energy, environmental regulations, and local strategies for advancing a clean energy future. The panel is hosted by Christine Kennelly. She's the director of the San Luis Valley Ecosystem Council, who helped pass Colorado's Renewable Energy Act, Amendment 37 in 2004, and has overseen continued development of solar and local energy projects in the region. Please welcome our energy transition panel.
Woo! Hi, everybody. Sun, yes. Absolutely, we love the sun, and it's greeting us after that beautiful rain. So I am going to very quickly introduce the panelists. We have some wonderful people that have dedicated their lives, honestly, to good policy. And I know that probably doesn't sound all that interesting to people to think about policy, but policy affects your everyday life in a big way. And how we shape that policy on the local, state, and federal level makes all the difference in the world in terms of our quality of life. So, without any further intros from what we're going to be talking about, I just wanted to very quickly make sure that people understood there's some logistics. Number one, of all the stuff that we're talking about today, there's actually handouts that you can get that are right there on the stage. And please feel free to pick one up. They're very important in terms of really understanding a lot of what we're going to be going over today. There's actually a sign-up sheet for the San Luis Valley Ecosystem Council. If you are not part of our if you're not part of our newsletter list, please feel free to sign up, and we will make sure that you are getting information about public lands and what's happening on the federal and state level right now, which is really important because this community is surrounded by public lands, and what's happening to these public lands right now is very important in terms of our quality of life. So, the other thing I just want to mention really quickly is that the Ecosystem Council just received a grant to set up 10 air quality monitoring stations throughout the San Luis Valley. Let me say that again. The Ecosystem Council, in cooperation with the Colorado School of Public Health, has gotten funding to set up 10 air quality monitoring stations around the valley. This is really important. We need it. We need that infrastructure. We need that baseline. Okay, and just so you know, for the second half of our presentation, because we had so many questions last year, we are going to be presenting, and then we're going to be making our way over to the porch stage, and we are going to have a follow-up discussion with whoever is interested, because we're thinking about developing a working group that may want to start thinking about forming our own legislation around materials, building materials, low carbon building materials that we could actually get funded, that we can actually get some political capital for, to be able to start building alternative houses that are actually legislated on the state level. This is really important. And I know a lot of the focus of this energy fair is alternative building. So let's get it legislated. Okay. So that being said, to my left is Natasha Ledger, and I'm not going to get into their professional backgrounds. I'm just going to talk personal here, because Natasha, the first time I met her, was at a Southern Rockies Conservation Alliance retreat, and she asked the best questions. I thought, who is this woman? She was amazing. And to my far left is Richard Hubler. Richard is Alamosa County Administrator Extraordinaire. He actually facilitated the solar regulations that have gone through that county. He has a lot to tell you about what's going on there. And I got to tell you, Richard, when I was at that hearing where you were educating the county commissioners about the different solar projects that they had to make a decision on, you were masterful. You were absolutely masterful. Okay, and to my right is Jan Rose, and Jan is with Citizens for a Livable Climate. And it's a coalition of how many organizations? 57 organizations around the state that are working to mitigate climate change. Really important, really important. So Jan spends her time making sure that legislation gets passed in the state that makes sense for all Coloradans so that we can make this transition in a practical way. Okay. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Natasha. She's taken on the federal level first.
Thanks so much, Chris, and thank you to all of you who are here today. It's a pleasure to be here in Crestone. And Chris, I want to say that first meeting at the Circa was equally impressive for me of you and all the work that you're doing here in the San Luis Valley. So big hand for Chris. So as Chris said, my name is Natasha Leger. I am the Executive Director for Citizens for a Healthy Community. We are based in Paonia, and our community is very similar to yours. We kind of want to chart our own way, and we have been having similar challenges with oil and gas. It was founded, CHC was founded in 2009 by concerned citizens, and our focus is on preventing new oil and gas leasing and development in our mountain watershed. And just a little bit of background on me is I've been with CHC for, hard to believe, 15 years now. And prior to that, I was working on scenario-based strategic planning for companies. And then before that, I was an international trade lawyer. And in between those two, I was editor of a location intelligence magazine. So I bring a lot of different perspectives to our environmental advocacy, from business to policy to mapping and to scenario-based strategic planning. So that's just a little bit about me. And so you asked me to talk about the federal landscape right now, at least as it relates to oil and gas issues. And admittedly, it's a little dim and not super uplifting. But let me start out with just a little bit of history, perhaps, on the Mineral Leasing Act, because you've probably seen a lot of news about the energy dominance agenda, which is all about unleashing fossil fuels, oil and gas, and coal on public lands. And so, for me, the question is, well, what did things look like before we started having unfettered leasing? And so I thought we would go back to the Mineral Leasing Act of 1920. And interestingly enough, that act came into play because before that, with the 1872 Mining Act, leases were basically, not leases, but mining rights were basically just given away. And so the US government didn't have any control over it anymore. And so as a result of World War I and the needs for new energy, and there was an energy dominance agenda at that point, they realized that, wait a minute, if we just left everything open to the private sector, then all of the resources would be exhausted. And so that's where the leasing system came into play, so that the government could still retain rights over the resources and the land, but yet the private sector could develop them. And so there are a couple of principles that are around that leasing framework. And one of them is that the lands should be developed by the private sector. 2 is that the U.S. government retains control. 3 is that the benefits should be evenly distributed so that there isn't a concentration of wealth around oil and gas companies. And then 4 is that the revenues should go back to the areas in which these resources are being developed. So over the years, we've seen that kind of ebb and flow, but I bring that up because we're now supposedly back into an energy dominance agenda, and now trying to unleash unfettered leasing and development, but yet the reason why we had this act was recognizing that unfettered leasing would be a problem. So with that said, so what's going on with the budget bill, for example? The budget bill that was passed in the summer has modified the Mineral Leasing Act to now require mandatory quarterly leasing in 10 states, including Colorado. And the problem with that is that it really takes discretion away from the Bureau of Land Management in terms of determining what will be leased and what will not be leased. What it requires now is that any lands that are open and eligible in a resource management plan and nominated must be leased on a quarterly basis. And in addition, the modification states that the agency cannot impose any stipulations or conditions for environmental or health purposes that are not already in the resource management plan. And so a resource management plan can be 2 years old, it can be 10 years old, it can be 25 years old. And so now what the law is prescribing is that that resource management plan determines all future conditions for environmental purposes. So it really takes away agency discretion, and as a result, in many respects, takes away our public voice. So that's what's happening relative to leasing. And 2 other things I wanted to talk about quickly, and then I'll pass the mic to Richard. Oh, it's going to Jan next, sorry. So 2 other things I wanted to talk about was, so one is we're seeing a lot of reform at the National Environmental Policy Act regulation level. So the National Environmental Policy Act, otherwise known as NEPA, is our bedrock environmental federal legislation. And the purpose of that act was to ensure that there would be informed agency decision-making on projects, federal projects that impact communities and have environmental impact. And then 2 is to ensure that there's public participation. And so what we've seen recently is that the Council for Environmental Quality, NEPA implementing regulations were rescinded back in the spring. And so And then also at the agency level, interim regulations have been put in place, which basically put all of their procedures for environmental reviews into non-binding agency documents. So the idea here, and also, kind of from my perspective in terms of the entire energy dominance agenda, is that it's really about silencing public comment and community voices. Because industry already has and has had an outsized influence, so they don't need much more. We already know that the rules have been stacked against us for a long time. But the reason why those rules are there is to provide some guardrails, and frankly, it gives communities like ours a fighting chance. And so once those are taken away, we're going to have to start to look elsewhere. So that's what's happening on the NEPA front. And then again, I just want to repeat on the NEPA side, there are four main principles that NEPA provides for. One is transparency, two is informed decision making, three is public participation, and four is accountability. And so on the accountability front, the next piece that's happening right now is that there's legislation that's moving through Congress called the SPEED Act, which is intended to further erode NEPA by trying to really cut out the ability for judicial review. And so one of the things that it's doing is cutting down the amount of time that people would have to bring a challenge to an agency action, so from 5 years to 5 months. So you can imagine how that becomes extremely problematic. So that's called permitting reform. So it's under the guise of streamlining the process of getting permits for whether it's fossil fuel projects or renewable energy projects. But in fact, what this bill is trying to do is really reduce the capacity for judicial review. Should I stop there?
Did you want to just mention something about preventing sell-off or not what we had mentioned?
Oh, so you probably heard a lot about the sell-off of public lands. We were successful as a community's, sportsman's community as well. Everybody turned out in opposition. Everybody loves their public lands. And in Colorado, over 70% of people love their public lands and put protection of water, wildlife, and the environment over extraction. And many others as well. And so it's a bipartisan issue. And so in the budget bill reconciliation process, we're successful in getting that provision taken out of the bill. And by public land sell-off, what that means is that public lands could be sold off to states, developers, to local governments. And public lands, it's probably the second greatest American idea following the Bill of Rights, right? This whole idea that we get to share in these resources. And so from that perspective, the sell-off, hopefully we won't have to fight that another day, but we were successful in that. But there's the sell-out piece that's really important. And this is what I was talking about in terms of the budget bill and the mandatory leasing. And so while it's not an outright sell-off to other entities, but once you reduce the regulatory oversight and make it so much easier and allow for all of this unfettered development, basically you're selling out to the industry. So the provisions that I talked about before are frankly just as egregious. And so we need to really look at this pattern that is taking place. And then in terms of a lease sale that's now under the new budget bill provisions, there's a Colorado lease sale, the first quarterly lease sale for 2020 26, and there are about 73,000 acres that are being scoped right now. So there is a public comment period that ends on October 2nd, which is an opportunity, in theory, to comment on these leases. There are a few parcels in the North Fork where I'm from. I don't know that there are any here in the San Luis Valley.
There were, and we were able to get them all off the table. For 10 years, we fought all oil and gas speculation in this valley. There's been no oil and gas development here, but guess what? This is going to make it really easy for them to come back, and they will.
And Chris, I'm glad you said that, because also in the North Fork, we haven't seen any leasing of public lands to oil and gas since 2013. And like you, we want to keep it that way, and it's just gotten a lot harder. And the last piece I'll just say on the federal side of things is that not only are you seeing that dynamic happen, but that's also being pushed down to the states and local government, utilizing the power of the purse and the power of the federal government to try to really dictate state and local government policies. So there's a lot for us to pay attention to, but at the same time, and why I'm so honored to be on this panel, is that we do have 3 levels of government. We do have separation of powers and separation of government, or federalism in this country, and it's really important to recognize the different roles that each one of those governments play. And so when the federal government steps back, then we want the state and local government to step up. And so there's a lot that we can do. I want to reinforce Chris's statement about policy, which is that policy affects us all, and we all play a role in that, and I'm looking forward to this continued conversation.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jan Rose. I am the legislative analyst for the Colorado Coalition for a Livable Climate. So my job is to work on climate, energy, water, and land legislation at the state level. And I was here last year talking about the progress that we made on beneficial electrification, the opportunity to generate your own electricity using solar panels, putting a battery on the side of your house, running an off-grid lifestyle. And a year ago, we passed some legislation that requires your local utility to buy that energy from you at the same price that they would pay a wholesale energy supplier. So like the food guys were talking about becoming a producer in your own right, you now have the ability in the state of Colorado to become an energy producer and to actually get paid for producing electricity, and that includes allowing your local utility to access the battery in your electric vehicle. So there's a guy in Grand Junction who has a Ford F-150 Lightning, which is right now the highest capacity electric truck on the market, and that truck is powerful enough to power his entire 1,800 square foot home when the power goes out. It is a very powerful vehicle, in addition to running all of his farm equipment off the back of his truck and setting up campsites and all sorts of things he does. But he gets paid $1,800 a month from the Grand Junction utility for accessing his solar panels and his F-150 battery when that battery is plugged into his garage. So we've begun to say to the state of Colorado, let us be part of the solution, but we're not going to be part of the solution because we're happy little campers. We're going to get paid to be part of the solution, right? We want to run with the big dogs. So this most recent session that ended in May, we then took it a step further and said, now let's do some things with buildings. Okay, we've taken care of the grid. We've provided ways to create what's known as a virtual power plant, where you create your own little mini power plant on your property. Now we want to make buildings more energy efficient. And so on the 2nd of September, the state passed the Model Low Energy and Carbon Code, which is an update to state building regulations that encourages you to use more energy efficient building materials. And in addition to those new international building code adoption, we also passed a bill called embodied carbon that basically recognizes that alternative building materials like hempcrete, like straw bale, like earthship, lots of alternative building materials from stick and brick, have value in and of themselves as a structure, and therefore we should give you a tax credit if you choose to use those alternative building materials. And so we passed a law that looks at what's known as cradle to gate emissions, meaning what does it take to build that bale and deliver it to the gate of your property. Let's give you a tax credit to help you fund that choice of building materials. So what we passed at the state level last session is that kind of flexibility in building materials for commercial businesses. What the governor wants to pass in his last year in office is extending that to residential building. And that makes me very excited to be here, because last year I heard a lot of presentations about alternative building materials. And this valley has some people who have enormous expertise on low carbon building. And I am excited to say this is the year that Colorado wants to move forward on making sure that what you guys know how to do, the whole state is incentivized to do. And it wants to extend that tax credit and funding model so that you can get low interest loans that are backed by the state to build your residential projects as well. So we're excited to move forward with that. We also are looking at putting together, as Chris said, a working group of people who can work with the state agencies on how to implement these lower carbon building materials into our state regulations. Because if you haven't heard already, you certainly will hear before the end of the energy fair, that every county has its own building codes and its own building departments and its own inspectors and its own zoning, and it gets really messy and you run through a whole lot of hoops. And so people like Richard and people here in Saguache County and people in Chaffee County and all over the state are taking it upon themselves to endorse and support more energy efficient, more utility efficient access to quality of life that allows you to live more independent of what you would otherwise have to go to the Front Range to get. So we did some good things, nibbling around the edges, because we don't have any money as a state. We don't have any money because the feds clobbered us. And so we had to just have a special session in August to cut another $1 billion out of state funding. And the feds cut money for food assistance, and they cut all of the alternative energy tax credits. So as of the end of September, there is no more federal tax credit for electric vehicles. As of the end of the calendar year, there is no more 26% tax deduction for solar panels on your roof. There is no 30% tax reduction for a battery on the side of your house, or a battery hookup from your vehicle if you have an electric vehicle. So we're working to shore up those state resources. And one of the things we're doing is heading to the ballot in November, asking the people of Colorado to step up and help us fund replacement food for the people who are losing their food assistance around the state, and also to ensure that we have healthy school meals for all K through 12 school children, both breakfast and lunch, served by local suppliers wherever the school district can contract with a local farm to supply local food, produce, livestock, etc. So you will be seeing Prop LL and Prop MM on your ballot this November, and that, I hope, will will give you some good reason to make sure that our kids can learn in a healthy environment by having proper nutrition, and that the least among us does not get wiped out of existence by the federal budget cuts. And while Natasha was talking, I had this old song from the group The Eagles, Hotel California, running through my brain. And I don't even remember what the name of the song is, but I remember the lyric goes, "Rich men came and raped the land. Nobody caught 'em. They called it paradise, the place to be. Kiss it goodbye." And that feels a little bit like the fight the three of us are fighting here on this stage today, is to keep what is precious to Coloradans. And so I'm working at the state level to do that, and I hope you all will help contribute to our adoption of some alternative building materials that you all are so good at in this valley. And with that, I'll turn it over to Richard, who can talk about how it's being implemented in Alamosa County.
I just want you to emphasize this.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot. This is important. So the governor is term limited, the attorney general is term limited, the speaker of the House is term limited, the president of the Senate is term limited. The entire political structure of the state of Colorado is up for renewal. Everybody is termed out of office. They can't run again. We have to get all new people in. Fresh blood is a great opportunity to get your voice on the agenda at the state capitol. So I want to encourage you to get to know your local and state officials, and I want to tell you that I spent 16 years in Salida before I moved back down to the Front Range because I needed health care I couldn't get in Salida. So I spent 16 years in Chaffee County, really feeling like a rural voice out in the wilderness, never even been to the Colorado State Capitol. But right now in the San Luis Valley, the head of the entire Democratic caucus is your state representative. And Matthew Martinez is the head of the entire Democratic caucus. If you got a bill you want to run, Matthew Martinez is your guy to get it through the legislature, and he is your local state representative. You get to call him up and say, "I'm a constituent and I want this." It's a super excellent place to be. Then you add on top of that, that on the Senate side, so Matthew's in the House, on the Senate side, Cleve Simpson, who is the Alamosa County hosted, he's got this whole area in his territory, is the Senate Minority Leader. So he is the #1 Republican in the entire state legislature. So you have the most powerful Republican and one of the most powerful Democrats as your local elected officials. And that gives this valley power, at least for the next year until all these people are up for re-election, that you may not have ever had. Since I moved to Salida in 1998, nobody's represented us. All of the leadership comes out of like the rich areas, Summit County, Eagle County, right? They don't come to these rural parts of the state. But now, through a combination of luck and good voting, you have more power right now than you may have ever had, and I really hope that you will decide to use it and make smart choices for how you want to see your community move forward.
Thank you. My name is Richard Hubler. I'm the land use administrator for Alamosa County. I'm also the director of the building department. So my office and my role covers a lot of stuff that's relevant to the conversation we're having here, from alternative building materials to solar. But what I'm going to start talking about a good bit is solar, and I just got super lucky because I didn't even know this map was going to be here. But this map is about 15 years old now. And it came out of a lot of efforts from the Ecosystem Council and the Water Protection Coalition to understand how solar is appropriate for the San Luis Valley. And this is relevant because one of the things that Alamosa does do a fair bit about is solar permitting. And we do that from the rooftop behind the meter, on your garage or on your house, to the community scale solar garden, all the way up to the massive, 10 or 100 megawatt solar projects. Alamosa has made the news relatively recently in this regard for several different things. Back earlier this year, we actually denied a solar permit by a company called Corsail that was down in Alamosa County, right on the Rock Creek drainage, sort of between the Monte Vista Wildlife Refuge and the state wildlife area, the Playa Blanca State Wildlife Area. And that's a good example and kind of a case study for why solar is a good idea is not always a good idea in every place. More recently, we actually made the news in this morning's paper of the Valley Courier. We're on the front page about several projects that are coming up, and that was on my talking list. And those include another large-scale solar project of about 100 megawatts near Mosca, and then a couple smaller community-scale projects that are in the 4 to 5 megawatt range on much smaller tracks. So as we think about solar beyond your household, as we're thinking about community solar, utility solar, it's important to kind of understand a couple concepts. I just want to cover those real briefly. Behind the meter is what we oftentimes refer to as the personal use solar. This is the most democratized version of solar power. This is the one that you have entirely in your control because it literally sits and plugs into your electric system behind the meter. So this is what we talked about earlier, the meter spinning backwards and getting the credit for the energy you're producing. That's all in your house, on your barn. It's before you are getting power from the system. The community scale solar is the first kind of step up from that in both size and opportunity because that's the solar power that's in front of the meter. So it has to integrate with the utility provider. And that's the one that can provide, to local community members. You can buy subscriptions to this if you don't have the capacity to put solar on your own roof. If you're a renter or if your property doesn't allow it because it's beautifully treed like this park, then these kind of community scale solar gardens allow you an opportunity to participate in producing solar because your money helps fund those development of those projects and you get the benefit of that solar production. You get a credit typically on your bill. The larger scale solar, the utility scale solar, those are the ones that make the news. Those are the ones that we've had in the valley for 15 years now. Those are the ones that are sometimes really great ideas and sometimes really bad ideas. Some of you from Saguache County may remember the bird cooker. I think as some of us affectionately call it, the concentrated solar that proposed to utilize mirrors to superheat a column that would provide energy. Not necessarily a great idea. Corsail, I would say, was not a great idea. Certainly Alamosa County did not approve it. And that's, just for those that don't know, that's not my decision. That's the county commissioners that make that decision. I facilitate the process to get it to them for a decision. And then we've got a variety of existing solars. You drive down Highway 17, especially around Mosca. Most of those solar plants developed about 10 to 15 years ago, and they're kind of in the heart of the valley here because this is where sort of the heart of the valley from a transmission perspective comes into play. The 3 lines that come over the pass and supply all of the valley are also the same lines that take the power we produce out of the valley to the front range, but they all come into Mosca basically to a substation that's owned by Piesco or Xcel Energy and Tri-State, and then they disperse from there into a variety of different networks and go out to all the communities. They're the ones that provide power here, which is why last spring when we had that wet snowstorm that tripped the line coming over the pass, nobody in the valley had power for 4 hours roughly. That's because that impacted this kind of main breaker point. So we do see a lot of solar in the Mosca area because it's close to that substation. But Alamosa County over the past 10 years or so has permitted about 5 projects of a variety of scales. We currently have several more. We kind of hit a lull because of some transmission challenges. A lot of the poles, as you guys have seen driving around, a lot of the cables and the poles are being restrung. It's not dramatically changing our transmission, but it's incrementally allowing for new projects to come on the grid. It's a constant conversation about increasing our transmission out of the valley, both for a capacity perspective, taking advantage of the solar development opportunities we have here, and also from a resiliency perspective. We haven't yet had a major fire over Poncha Pass, but if we do, we're all going to be in trouble for as long as it takes to recover from that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about transmission in a second. But we currently have 3 projects that are kind of up for approval in the next several months. One of them I mentioned is a 100 megawatt plant. It's actually right around that substation on abandoned farmland. And that'll have 100 megawatts of production, or 110 megawatts of production, and 110 megawatts of battery storage, meaning that in addition to producing that energy, it produces basically double that energy and has that capacity to store that extra energy for up to 4 hours, so it continues to go on the grid. And then we've got a couple smaller community scale projects, one right off Highway 17 at Stanley Road and one right off Highway 160 at the 116 Road. These are those 4 to 5 megawatt projects, and these are the ones that community members can buy into. So if you're in the Alamosa County area, certainly, or if you're even interested, you can reach out to my office. We've got information on our website. You can kind of see what those projects look like. All of those do go through what we call a 1041 permitting process. Getting back to the kind of state regulations, this is a benefit that the local jurisdictions have from the 70s that allows us to weigh in on projects that are of state importance, that have a local impact as well. So all the energy projects, are evaluated under this way. Thankfully, as Jan was saying, or no, actually Natasha was saying, we haven't seen any oil and gas projects, but they would follow the same regulations. This is how we evaluate our solar projects in Alamosa County, and now actually in Saguache County as well. Saguache County recently passed their own 1041 regulations for solar earlier this year. And so we now have opportunities to utilize these regulations to evaluate these applications that come before us. And that's super critical because when we think about the role of the local government, that's where the decisions for these kinds of projects should be made. That's where the impacts certainly are. We're contributing to a statewide and a nationwide grid. We've got, the statewide, nationwide need, but those panels are not statewide, nationwide. They're right here in somebody's backyard. And so it's important that we understand where that impact is and we manage where that impact is. And so those regulations vary by community, but they provide an opportunity for the decision makers, your elected local officials, to weigh in on those decisions. So certainly that's public hearings, that's public meetings. If you're interested in that, definitely stay engaged and involved. You'll see that coming forward in Alamosa County, like I said, and then potentially in Saguache and other counties as well. Just making sure I get everything on my checklist here. Oh, the other thing I wanted to kind of stress is that starting with this kind of approach, and so we're going to have this map at the next session. Yeah, so you'll be able to see a little bit closer, but this was put together, like I said, about 15 years ago by the Ecosystem Council and the Water Protection Coalition, and it involves data sources from about a dozen different considerations, including actively irrigated farmland, surface versus groundwater irrigation, natural protected areas, transmission lines, and what it did was it started to create and identify these are areas where solar, utility scale solar developments might be a problem, and these are areas where they might be a good idea. So Alamosa County recently updated our comprehensive plan. And for those of you that aren't familiar, a comprehensive plan is kind of like a long-term strategic vision. It's what underlies the regulations. So it doesn't look at everything you have to do, but it sets the framework for how we create regulations. And when we did this back in 2008, we actually established at that point that Alamosa County wanted to be a leader in renewable energy. And so that's what led to our 1041 regulation creation, and that's what ultimately led to all the plans that we approved. We recently updated that. It actually was adopted in July of this year. And one of the things that we did in that adoption was we kind of took this idea, zoomed it into Alamosa County specifically, and updated it. And it's actually in the packet here. We've got this energy overlay. And we basically, in our comprehensive plan, we mapped out those areas that we thought solar development, utility scale solar development should go. And most importantly, we took out the places where it shouldn't, right? So as we think about examples like core sale or the bird cooker, we've got these ideas where, this is the wrong type of development for our community, or this is the wrong place for development for our community. And so now we have a map in our comprehensive plan that developers can look to and see, oh, how's the county going to consider my request? Is it in line with their goals or not? And so that's a super useful result. And like I said, it kind of stemmed out of this idea that Chris spearheaded so many years ago. And then finally, the last thing that I wanted to briefly mention was about transmission. On this, you can see the transmission lines, and if you listen to a developer, they'll talk about when they're siting their solar projects, they need to obviously make it pencil out financially. And so the whole development cost, of the solar panels, the production, all that stuff, they have to recover that by selling the power to the utility company. And the more infrastructure they put in to get to that point, the harder that is to do. And that's the reason we see solar systems initially clustered around that substation and now kind of along these existing transmission lines. Because if you build a transmission line as a utility developer, you don't get any money back for that. You only get money back for the power you're selling. So that's just an overhead cost. And so transmission lines are the kind of the starting point for developers. They look and say, how far can we be from the kind of line that we need to be on? The capacity of the line, is it a 69 kilovolt line, 115 kilovolt line, a 300 kilovolt line? Because that determines how big of a project, how much power they can put in that line. Kind of like water running in a hose. You're going to get a lot more water from a 2-inch hose, like a fire hose, than you're going to get from a 1/2-inch garden hose, right? The solar developers are thinking in that same time frame. But as I mentioned, we've got transmission challenges, and for several years, what we were hearing at the county level was that solar projects weren't really going ahead because there wasn't available transmission. They couldn't get an agreement with Xcel or with Tri-State to sell them power because there wasn't the capacity to use it locally or to get it out of the system. So we have been working in Alamosa County, and we've been having this conversation since 2010, I think, about increasing transmission, and this is a big statewide conversation with the Public Utility Commission. Our priority is, can we both get new lines out of somewhere other than Poncha? And so a number of entities working together, all the counties last fall, with the support of the Colorado Energy Office, did apply for some federal funds when they were available, and actually were awarded a grant to study transmission corridor opportunities. We got as far as having a contractor on board, and now we're in this weird phase of the federal government deciding whether or not they're going to give us the money again, and they keep inventing new words as to why they're not giving us the money yet. But ultimately our goal is that if that happens, that study in cooperation with the Energy Office and the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority, or CETA, will help us determine new corridors, and then we can get hopefully some utility companies like PSCO or Tri-State, or even potentially CETA, which is the Colorado Transmission Authority, to help develop new lines going out of the valley. And that'll help us both with the resilience component. So if we have a fire here, we still have power coming in and out other areas, and it'll help us with the capacity so that we can really take advantage of all the sun we have. In Alamosa especially, we've got a lot of irrigated agricultural land that's going to go away. Land conversion across the state and across the nation looks different. Ours is involuntary, and we don't have the concern that somebody's going to take productive agricultural land and take it out of that use for some other use like solar. We have the current concern instead we're going to have a lot of irrigated land that can no longer be irrigated, and we have to find some other use for it to help the property owner, to help the community, and solar is kind of our opportunity from that regard. So we're looking forward to that transmission study hopefully eventually getting funded. We asked for that study for the consultant to basically find 3 corridors that left the valley, and that it not be Poncha Pass. So 2 very basic requirements, which hopefully we'll end up with, and that'll start the 10 to 15 year, probably $5 billion process of getting new transmission lines out of here. So solar development, energy development at all is not cheap, it's not fast, but we're doing certainly what we can. So.
Thanks, everybody. If it's okay, I'm going to ask them some quick questions. How are we doing on time? We good? And I just want to remind everybody we are going to be heading over to the porch next to continue this discussion and hopefully talk about maybe putting together a working group. Logistically, I just want to mention again, we have those handouts over there with all the most recent and we think important legislation that you need to really understand and be knowing about on the state and federal levels. And there's also a sign-up sheet. So if we run out of the handouts, no problemo, I can just send them to you. So just, write down your email there. And I just have a really quick story because I know when we talk about this stuff, it sounds a little abstract. But I just wanted to tell you about a real story that happened. Mark and I were having dinner in 2015 with the engineer that was basically running the solar facility near the Mosca substation. And this had just happened, so he just really needed to talk about it. And he said, you know what happened to me on Thursday? And what, And he said, and this was after all the center pivot irrigation had shut down for the winter. So this was in November. He said, I got a call from Xcel at 8 o'clock, and they said, we're taking the valley off grid for the day to see if you guys can float on solar. Yeah, that happened. We're checking emergency possibilities, and we just want to see what this, and this was 2015, by the way. It's not, 2025. They said, we just want to see if the valley can float by itself all day on solar. And it worked, and no one knew a thing. He said at 4 o'clock, he could not wait to see the valley get back online. So yeah, we're there. We're already there. Yeah. So anyway, Richard, I wanted to ask you though, how much solar in terms of megawatts is being, do we have now in the valley?
So we've permitted approximately 150 megawatts that's in production currently, and that's been for a number of years. Probably 2015 was the last time that those kind of went into working. We've since, in the last 5 years, we've permitted a battery-only storage, so a BESS, battery energy storage system, only project of 95 megawatts that's directly across the street from the substation. That one hasn't started construction yet, but they're hoping to. Everybody is hoping to. We mentioned the tax credit issue. The federal guidance for anything related to funding right now, as you're probably aware, is confusing at best and problematic in most cases. And certainly on the tax credit side, on the utility scale side, they do still have a little bit of time. They have to go into construction by July 4th of next year. And exactly what into construction means varies widely. Yeah, so we've got about 150 megawatts. Currently, we've got that 95 megawatt battery storage system that'll be working its way to construction relatively recently. We've got 100 megawatts that's currently going through our process. We're expecting to have a public hearing on that one. That one's right near the substation in Mosca. We're expecting to have that one in the next probably 3 to 4 months. We'll have a public hearing on that, and that'll be 110 megawatts of production and 110 megawatts of storage. And then we've got other projects that are, in the pipeline that people are interested that are talking to my office. So we could see as large as a 600 megawatt project in the next year in Alamosa County. So that would, more than triple our kind of current production. And we certainly. We have so much sun. We produce more power as illustrated. Even still, probably we would be producing more power than our current needs are. They've grown a little bit, but not a ton. We don't have any data centers here yet, thankfully. The Kit Carson, I'm sorry, not Kit Carson. The San Luis Valley REC is a little bit easier to determine what their needs are than Excel. They're a little bit more forthcoming. And having talked with Eric Erickson, their director, I understand that their annual needs or their needs are about 100 megawatts. They're also looking at doing solar development. They've been restricted historically by their contract with Tri-State, but that's changing. So I expect to see some projects on their system as well in the future. So we certainly have the capacity here. Some of you may know Taos County across the border has been 100% solar during the summertime for a number of years now. They bought their way out of their contract with Tri-State to do that. And that's happened in Delta County. Delta County now has the Garnet Mesa agrivoltaic project, which is the largest agrivoltaic project. They've got some crazy number of thousands of sheep that are going to be grazing under those solar panels. So there's a lot of opportunities in Colorado, and there's a lot of opportunities here for us in the valley because we have such great sun. We've got good altitude. We have generally clear air, except for the dust days, right? But we get enough winds that it cleans the solar panels, which is also a benefit.
Thank you. I was told once by Mike Wisdom with the Development Resources Group that without the center pivot irrigation, which obviously takes the biggest draw, but the valley just, winter, 55 megawatts. So that's what we need to maintain here. Okay. All right, I'm just going to go through this really quickly. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to anything. How much time do we have now? Does anybody? 15 minutes? Okay, good. All right. Okay, I just have to say really quickly again that, there's been a lot of bad precedents with the, I'm calling it the big ugly bill, the big bowel movement bill. And we're also dealing with executive orders, memorandums of understanding, and proposed legislation that is really going to restrict our access to public lands. And how you do that is through 20-year leasing. And right now, what's being offered in that horrible bill that got passed is timber companies are going to be able to come in, and the Forest Service is literally being mandated to have to hand over these tracts without a lot of analysis to timber companies. And they're going to be able to hold on to these leases for 20 years. 20 years. Yeah. That's what Natasha means by sell-off. So people really need to start understanding how this is happening and how they're trying to privatize our public assets. Okay? That's what we're dealing with right now. There's a move to try and privatize everything. So we have to do everything we can think of to stand up for our assets and make sure we can hold on to them. And there's lots of ways to do that, and one is signing up right here. Okay. There's action alerts. We make it really easy for talking points. But people need to really step up and write and call and do everything you can think of so that your representatives know that you're watching them. Natasha, I wanted to ask you about a 5-part civic workshop. And I know it's not posted right now, but I wanted you to share with everybody what you did to really try and get people engaged with civic responsibility.
Thanks, Chris. Can I just pick up on what you just said earlier, and then I'll answer that? Because I think it's also really important that you give your public land agency employees some love, because they don't work for the money, right? I mean, they work for those agencies because they love public lands the way you do, and so they're your inside to all of this chaos that it's happening right now. And we need to rely on them to do the best that they can within a very difficult environment. So that's one thing that I will say. And then the other one is just to keep up on what's happening and comment as much as you can so that your voice is heard. Okay, so now on the civics class. So we held a 5-part civics class called Civics Today, Tools of Engagement. And we did this because for 2 reasons. One is that we recognized with the level of noise that's really out there regarding our political climate, that a lot of people are saying things, believing things, taking positions without actually a lot of context. And so reason number 1 was a lot of people have probably forgotten their high school civics if they were even taught it. And so we felt that there was really a need to fill that gap. And then the other reason is that a lot of people, as we're organizing around environmental protection, is, some people are like, well, do I pick protecting our democracy or do I pick environmental protection? And our democracy seems to be at greater risk. But these are all the same issues, because once you understand how our government works, why it was created the way it is, and that it was created so that democracy is there for people to have a voice in their future. Bottom line. And so understanding the issues that become important to you, whether they're environment, whether they're healthcare, whether they're peace and energy, or whatever the issue, the public policy issue is, it all resides in your ability to have a voice in what that looks like and how that also impacts you personally, impacts you as a community, impacts you locally and regionally. So this 5-part civic series was focused, first 2 parts were focused on our system of government, how we're set up, how it's government by the people, for the people. We've got 3 branches of government. There's separation of powers. And then we got into the Bill of Rights and constitutional rights. And so really understanding that there's a lot of power in the Constitution. It's basically a contract between we, the people, and government. And the idea is that those rights are there to protect the people from an abuse of government. And we're seeing that turned upside down right now. And then I think it's just really important that we remember people power. And I think it's really hard to start to we're starting to feel a little discouraged with all of the noise that's out there. And then frankly, in some respects, I blame the media on this. I mean, the media is normalizing what's happening. So there are a lot of things that we need to do. One is educate ourselves and while our civics course isn't online right now, there are a lot of others, but, get context. It was interesting, when I was an adjunct professor at one point and I was teaching international trade law, I gave an assignment to my students to follow an international trade issue for 10 weeks in the media. After the 10 weeks, I said, do you understand the issue? And they said, no. I still don't understand the issue. And it's because the media is not necessarily providing you with that context behind that. And I'm putting media just kind of blanket. I mean, there are a lot of really good media outlets, really good investigative journalists that are there providing that context. But in general, there's a lot of noise that's out there that is not providing the requisite context to understand what it is that is at stake and what the real issues are. So stay informed, tune out, I think, from time to time. Take a mental health day from all of the craziness. Read fiction. If you're not reading fiction, if you spend all your time on nonfiction, read fiction, because there's a lot of perspective and guidance in fiction. One of my favorite authors for our times is Rivera Sun. She is a nonviolent activist, and her view is her mission is to elevate the everyday activist to hero status, because we're kind of viewed as being, uppity or obstructionist. But, the heroes today are not just those that are exercising, what's the word I'm looking for? Good and evil in a violent context, right? It's the everyday actions that we're doing as individuals that rise up to creating the future that we want to see. Discernment. Critical thinking. And we were having this conversation this morning, which seems to be, unfortunately, lacking at scale, because there are a lot of really good critical thinkers out there. I think we're on this stage with some critical thinkers. If you're out here, you are a critical thinker, you're concerned about these issues. But we've seen an assault on that in education over the last decades or so. And so it's going to be up to us, I think, to help reinvigorate that sense of, it's important to think critically about things, really question where the information is coming from, have some media literacy about things, and really be willing to dig into some of the hard questions and not want to just outsource the answer to others. A lot of that answer is within us.
Thank you. I think I would like to ask everybody this. What is the common thread between federal, state, and local issues?
I think the common thread is we the people. There are things that you should do at the local level that the state cannot do for you. Likewise with the feds. And the reverse is also true. And there is also, I think, in the Rocky Mountain states, there is a love of wild places, a love of wild things. Nobody is speaking for wildlife. Nobody is speaking for national forests. Nobody is speaking for stream flow. They are wiping out our opportunity to protect what we love, and we can't let them get away with it. So we have to fight all the local actions that are going to try to log our forests or put an oil and gas fracking pad on there. I don't know if you know this, but today's fracking pads use 25 million gallons of fresh water just to stick that drill bit down there and pull that oil out. When you ask yourself what the value is of those barrels of oil versus the amount of permanently destroyed fresh water that goes down that hole, that's not a compromise I'm willing to make. Not with the scarce water resources that I'm accustomed to coming out of the Arkansas Valley. So to me, that's the common thread that all of us share, is we are working for our communities, and we are asking you to get involved and work for your community and work for your values. Because right now, if you don't protect your values, nobody else is going to do it.
Yeah, to build on that, I mean, I think the common thread is, we are still a democracy, and it's not a spectator sport, and so we all have to participate. And understanding that each one of these roles of government touches our lives in different ways, and they overlap in many ways. And when one system of government becomes abusive, then or overwhelming, it's important to rely on the others. I mean, again, back to our civics course, right? I mean, this is why we have separation of powers. It's in between agencies and or between government branches, right? So we have 3 branches of government, and then we have 3 levels of government. We have federal, state, and local. And it's really important that we engage at each one of those levels, because they are all touching on the things that we find important. And I think there's another piece in here that we need these levels of government to also acknowledge what's important for our future. So back to Jan's point of wildlife and environment and a healthy environment, we need that enshrined in our regulatory framework. And we've all been fighting for a long time for that, so we need that balance.
It's hard to follow both of those answers because those were my answers. But yeah, participation, place, and leverage. So participation is absolutely key. I think understanding the place, the scale, and the scope, your local governments are going to be talking about things at an entirely different scale and at a much more local place than the state and federal ones are. And so thinking about the kind of answers that you need to come up with for your town or for your POA or for your county are going to be different than the kind of answers we have to come up with statewide or nationwide. And that's where the levers come in, understanding what are you interested in, what do you want to engage in, what's the lever that you can help pull on to accomplish what it is, and are you applying that leverage at the appropriate place or scale of government?
Well, okay. I think we're getting close to wrapping it up. And as I mentioned, we are going to be heading over to the porch for people that want to dial in a little bit more on very specific issues having to do with the possibility of legislating zero carbon building materials and ways that we might be able to actually put together some really cohesive concepts, because ultimately we're not going to be writing the legislation, but we can certainly have a lot of input into how it's created. And I can tell you that because I've worked on a couple pieces of legislation that have actually passed through Congress. So it is possible. I just also want to say this too, because You know, when you talk to people throughout the valley, what comes up a lot, and the reason people are attracted to living here is because of the autonomy. I hear that a lot. People like the autonomy. They love being autonomous. But the irony of autonomy, interestingly, and the way to have more options in terms of your decision making is to build a strong infrastructure. That's how you have autonomy. Because you want to be able to have the option to get on a bus, plug in your car, or with your bike attached. And we just because we're out here, we still rely on a lot of infrastructure. And I just want to finish it with a story of a couple that lives on a ranch and have made a point of being incredibly autonomous, grow their own food, meat, everything. They don't even need very much at the grocery store. And don't even go to restaurants because they have everything they need. And when I heard about that, I looked at the person and said, do they have a pickup? Well, yeah, of course they have a pickup. Who built that pickup? Union labor built that pickup. I think it's really important that we understand that we're intricately connected to urban centers. And they need our support too. Okay, so let's just mosey on to the porch.